What's up YouTube, Kronos here, and welcome back to the PSO2 video. So today's video we're going over the next weapon in our new player's guide series. Today we'll be talking about the closest I have to melee dual wield before bouncer, the Twin Daggers. Twin Daggers, fighter's third weapon, will have you donning a pair of daggers and basically living out your robot space ninja fantasy, no relation to Warframe. With fast-paced combos, high damage, and some of the best mobility in the game, you'll be all over your targets. And no, I didn't say the best, I said some of the best. We're not coming for you yet, Wildlands. Calm down. So to start things off, Twin Daggers has the standard normal 3-hit combo, if talented up to 4 hits. With that 4th hit, to be perfectly honest, we believe has some form of an iframe. I don't know if it's just the movement on that 4th hit overall that just moves you out of danger, but I can say from my own experience, I straight up have never been hit during that 4th attack. At the time of this recording, triple checking basically every publication and every resource I can find, nothing says that that 4th attack has an iframe innately, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave an asterisk next to it in case new information is found. Daggers also has a pretty forgiving parry. Just press your weapon action and you negate incoming damage. To follow that up, as long as it's talented of course, you do have a counter attack by just pressing normal. That counter dealing great damage and fantastic tracking towards your target. Like every other weapon in the game, you also have a step counter. It's worth noting while step counter is very powerful, it has no aerial staying power, meaning you drop almost directly to the ground the second you go for using it. Next, we'll move on to fighter's Photon Arts. But before we jump into that, we do have to mention one specific skill fighter has, and that's skip arts. Fighters' PAs are split into 2 different halves. There's a brief period between the first and second half where you can just continue to spam a PA or move on to a different action. Fighter skip arts allows you to skip to the second half of the Photon Art as long as you don't put any movement action during the Photon Art activation. In most cases with Photon Arts, specifically fighter ones, the second half or the ending of the Photon Art has some of the highest amount of damage for it, so skipping to that second half is going to be very beneficial for fighter gameplay. Not to stall to get to the Photon Arts anymore, but I did forget to mention one specific mechanic daggers have access to, and that would be acceleration drive. Acceleration drive is a piece of movement tech that is unique to Twin Daggers. Essentially, it allows you to teleport or track towards your target if pressing normal attack at the right time after a Photon Art. That timing is displayed by the game showing your character glow this weird purplish color. Now at first the timing on this is a bit strange as it's not immediately right after the Photon Art ends. Fighter does have another mechanic called same art skip and another art skip, which essentially allows you to skip to a certain part of your normal attack after using PAs. Basically same arts being 2 PAs used being the same will allow you to get to your 3rd normal attack immediately, or another art skip allowing you to get to your 4th normal attack. Because of this, there is a slight delay before the actual acceleration drive pops up, but you'll see your character glow and that's the timing for it. Realistically, this is only used for gap closing or tracking purposes, and it's actually not that long of a distance. At the time of recording this, there's currently a bug in game that allows you to basically lengthen the amount of distance by unlocking and tabbing onto a target over and over again, resetting the distance that it tracks, but more than likely in the future this will be fixed, so I don't want to talk about it too terribly much. Just know that within the distance that acceleration drive is intended to work, it's fantastic. It's just when you move out of that distance. Now we can finally move on to the Photon Arts. First off, we have Hell's coat. It reads, unleash a shockwave after leaping forward. Very basic, but essentially you move towards your target and then you let a shockwave out jumping backwards. Great for gap closing for the first half, though you usually want to cancel that second half out and move on to another PA. Next, we have Pirouette Ripper. It reads, cleave through foes with countless strikes after a quick stab. Again, a very basic description, but it is actually pretty on point. You essentially stab towards your target, and then you let out a bunch of slashes in the air. These slashes all come out near instantly, so it's very, very fast. It's a fantastic PA to use if you know the target's not going to be staying still for very long, especially that second half with the amount of damage it puts out. Realistically, usually you want to skip the first half because that first half doesn't really deal much damage. It's mostly just for tracking purposes, and its tracking isn't even that great in the first place. And to wrap things up, we'll talk about one of Dagger's strongest Photon Arts if you can land the entire thing, Circling Buzzard. It reads, approach the enemy while spinning and unleash a lightning quick flurry of attacks. Like the previous attacks before it, it's very direct, very to the point, but it's pretty on point for its description. You do spin at your target and you let go a crazy amount of attacks. It is pretty much an entire combo with that last hit hitting really, really hard. Like I mentioned earlier, it is Dagger's strongest Photon Art as long as you can land every single hit. If your target is highly mobile, realistically, missing that last attack is going to make it weaker than, say, something like Pirouette Ripper. And that's it for Daggers Photon Arts. To wrap things up, we're going to talk, last but not least, about its Photon Blast. Now, if you're unaware of how Photon Blasts work, essentially it's a large attack that's specialized to each weapon. You're able to let off this attack once the actual gauge itself has fully charged. Using different PAs will charge the gauge, and the gauge itself does charge over time. Now, Daggers PB lets out a crazy amount of attacks in a very small area. There's a little bit of AoE to it, nothing too crazy, but it is very powerful. And at the same time, it's also not the strongest option you have available to you. While on paper by itself, it is Fighter's strongest Photon Blast available. However, it's worth mentioning that Double Saber's Photon Art does enable you to deal more damage, seeing as it does build 2 whirlwinds and allows you to expend them with a Deadly Archer right afterwards. With the comparison amount, the same amount of time that it would take to do that Photon Art and then use a Deadly Archer, to taking, Daggers Photon Art and then using the highest amount of DPS available for you right afterwards, it does come behind Double Saber with its Photon Art. But just counting the Photon Art by itself, it is extremely powerful, so hey, points for that one. I will say, as an extra nugget of information, if you're familiar with the multi-weapon system, Daggers multi-weapon with a pair of wired lance, though seeming redundant, can actually be very, very powerful. Where Acceleration Drive is fantastic while you're already in range, assuming you're using it as it's intended to be used and it's actually not using with the bug, it does fall off on its chase potential if your target does move out of its range. In situations like that, Wired Lance Gap Closer, or its weapon action, pairs really well with Daggers, basically getting you in the range for Acceleration Drive to be at its most optimal use. And you get to do your best impersonation of an Attack on Titan character, which, let's be obvious, we're all thinking about Levi. And that covers everything. So that wraps up our guide to, well, I guess new player's guide. Let's stay on brand, our new player's guide to Daggers. Like I said, this was very straightforward, nothing too crazy. We'll talk about more in-depth combos and things like that, probably in a different video overall. I'm thinking about setting up those videos, starting to move forward, but yeah, I didn't want to put them in the basics guide. I feel like it'd be too much to go over, and things are subject to change pretty heavily depending upon balance. As always, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to toss them in the comments below. Like helps out a ton. Subscribe if you want to keep up with this content. Join us over on Discord or follow me on Twitter for notifications, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care. Peace out.